Hello, and welcome to the Berry Center's 6th Annual Kentucky Arts and Letters Day. My name is Virginia Aguilar, and I am the Director of the Agrarian Culture Center and Bookstore here at the Berry Center. It is my privilege to organize this event each year, which, under normal circumstances, would see us gathered shoulder to shoulder in our local community center here in Newcastle, enjoying some of the greatest literary talent that our state has to offer. Obvious concerns for the well-being of our friends and neighbors kept us apart last year, and although we would love to be in your company this year, it is out of an abundance of caution that we chose this virtual platform. Tonight, from the comfort of your own home, you will be treated to readings from some of Kentucky's greatest living writers. And for the first time, we are thrilled to be sharing with you the very local talents of Henry County Judge Executive John Logan Brent, as well as two rising voices who also happen to be students in our Wendell Berry farming program of Sterling College. If you are interested in supporting the authors you are about to hear, as well as the Berry Center, please consider visiting berrycenterbookstore.com to place an order. Emma and I will get your book shipped to you as quickly as possible. Words sometimes fail in the face of deep gratitude, and I find myself in that place tonight. Thank you to these beloved authors who met my request to be part of today's program with incredible generosity. Thank you to the Berry Center's Director of Operations, Ben Aguilar, for his behind-the-scenes work of recording, editing, and broadcasting. There is no question that without his talents, this program would not have been possible. Thank you to Kentucky Humanities, an organization made up of people whose good work reaches all corners of our Commonwealth and beyond. Their support of this year's Kentucky Arts and Letters Day made it possible to transition to this virtual space. And finally, thank you to our MC for the evening, Paul Borntraeger. Paul is a native Kentuckian and owner of Acculay Farms in Jackson County, where he has been homesteading for more than 10 years. A member of the Kentucky Division of Forestry, Paul hopes to pursue more opportunities in sustainable forestry after graduating from the Wendell Berry farming program next year. And so, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Paul Borntraeger.
Hello, and welcome to the 6th Annual Kentucky Arts and Letters Day. I'm Paul Borntraeger. I am a first-year student in the Wendell Berry farming program of Sterling College, located here in Henry County, Kentucky, and I'm excited to guide you through tonight's readings. I know we all wish we could be together in person, and perhaps next year we will. However, for now, grab a comfortable seat in a location of your convenience and enjoy. For the night's first reading, we are honored to be joined by Kentucky's current Poet Laureate, Crystal Wilkinson. Crystal is the author of the novel Birds of Opulence, the Berry Center's Agrarian Literary League pick for 2020, and short story collections Blackberries, Blackberries, and Water Street. Her most recent publication is a poetry collection titled Perfect Black, which she will be reading from this evening.
Good afternoon. I'm Crystal Wilkinson, and it is great to be with you all here for Kentucky Arts and Letters Day. I'm very pleased to be a part of it. Thought that I would read just a few poems from my new collection called Perfect Black. And I thought I would read poems that I don't usually read. So the first one is called Slow Dance. My mama cries on lonesome shoulder, reaches into the shadows for broad shoulders to hold her up. She stands before the looking glass, red lace slip, black thigh highs, pointed white brassiere, admiring her looking glass self. She paints on lipstick and rouge, turns the edge of a hairpin around the tender of her ear, trying to remove the sweet nothings. I watch her conjure up a new world every night, cashing all her bus tokens right here in this room. My mama cries on lonesome shoulder, dusts herself with fragrant powder, and stretches up on tiptoe to kiss the lips of a ghost. She wraps her arms around his neck and slow drags with herself. This collection, my first collection of poetry, is divided up into 3 sections. The first section is sort of explores Black girlhood in rural Kentucky. The middle section is sort of a political awakening period for both myself and the speaker of these poems. And then the last section is about womanhood and current womanhood. Read a couple of pieces, one about religion and another about my mother. This is called Baptism. Flatwoods, Kentucky, 1972. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Imagine a girl, not yet troubled, dressed in a crisp white dress, black patent leather shoes, and new white tights, pressed hair smelling of royal crown, bangs curled under, glistening. He was the preacher, the Reverend William H. Mills Jr., long, good hair, slicked back, pearl-handled cane, a pocket watch chain dangling from a double-breasted suit. We stand in water up to our knees. The congregation reads scripture, eyes peeking up between hymnals and Sunday hats. The Bible is handed to the deacon. I baptize you in the name of the Son, the Father, and the Holy Ghost. See me submerged in cold creek water that seeps into my nostrils, tastes like danger in my mouth. I fight the hand of the preacher, come up gasping and crying, bless her heart, she's feeling the spirit, Sister Usher says under a heavenly hat. Everybody claps and commences to sing of being washed in the blood of the Lamb. But I didn't feel devotion, felt wicked with my secrets, wasn't even sure what the Holy Ghost was. See me with my legs closed and my skirt tail down. See me cover my knees. See me bless my food. And comfort was found in baptismal rewards, a bottle of orange knee-high, a sanctified fried chicken leg, corn pudding, and German chocolate cake. Let the church say amen. My full belly, the most sacred part. Anybody who's watching that knows about countrymen knows that often a countryman, a farmer, a miner, someone who has dairy cattle. In my experience, mountain men have often been stoic and sometimes seem to be emotionless. I grew up with a very loving grandfather who didn't say I love you quite often, but we knew that he loved us. But in this poem, I kind of get to the fact that, whenever he was growing tobacco or growing corn, he would say, you should see my corn, it sure is pretty. But I never heard him call my grandmother pretty, or he never called me pretty for that matter. And I think that is just a gesture toward the ways of men, the ways of rural men. So this is an ode called "Oh Tobacco." Oh tobacco, you are the warm burnt sienna of my grandfather's skin, soft like ripe leather. I cannot see you any other way but as a farmer's finest crop. You are a Kentucky tiller's livelihood. You were school clothes in August, the turkey at Thanksgiving, Christmas with all the trimmings. I close my eyes, see you tall, stately green, lined up in rows, see sweat seeping through Granddaddy's shirt as he fathered you first. You were protected by him, sometimes even more than any other thing that rooted in our earth. Just like family, you were coddled, cuddled, coaxed into making him proud. Spread out for miles, you were the only pretty thing he knew. When I think of you at the edge of winter, I see you brown, wrinkled, just like Granddaddy's skin. A 10-year-old me plays in the shadows of the stripping room. The wood stove burns. Calloused hands twist through the length of your leaves. Granddaddy smiles, nods at me when he thinks I'm not looking. You are pretty and braided, lined up in rows, like a room full of brown girls with skirts hooped out for dancing. And I think I will close with a little love poem. This is a poem that I wrote for my husband, Ron, who also illustrated this collection. He has some beautiful images in the book. This poem is called Witness. Ron and I have been together for, over a decade. I guess we're coming up on 14 years or 13 years. And one of my biggest regrets about our relationship, and I don't have many, is that he never had a chance to meet my grandparents. So that's what this poem is about. Witness for Ron. I'm convinced that if you could have seen my grandmother standing in the doorway waiting for him to come home from the fields, if you'd smelled that spectacular evening thick with sweat and felt the pulsing of the stars, if you'd borne witness to the animals' moans echoing in the holler that night, if you just could have seen the hair rise up on Granddaddy's arm like that, like offerings to God when his elbow touched hers, if you could have seen her longing dissipate just a little as he came through the door smelling like a day's work, you should have seen them close enough to breathe the same air while not even touching. He smiled at her without smiling. If you could have seen them watching me watch them, then you'd know how much I love you. If you could have heard her say, "You want some supper? We got pie." Thank you all.
Sally Rother is a Louisville native and a first-year student in the Wendell Berry farming program. Sally has a BFA in creative writing from Spalding University and has been involved in several gardening projects around Louisville. She's excited to be learning skills for living and working cooperatively with the land while in the farming program.
Hi, I'm Sally Rother. I'm a student at the Wendell Berry Farming Program, and I am going to read a poem for you about my childhood in Louisville. I don't say Louisville correctly. I'm really glad to have pulled this poem out again because it's made me reflect on how grounded I was in the place I used to live and how I've missed that feeling ever since my family and I moved out of the house we lived in. And I think that being in the Wendell Berry Farming Program has helped me identify that desire and will help guide me on the path to finding it again. All right. My old backyard. The tire swing in the corner where we acrobats fled, held two at a time. One of us in the loop and the other on top. A magnificent duo we were, spinning through the air in our flying act. Some rope and a tree was all we'd need to feel like we had wings. Headquarters was the clubhouse, where only spies could fit, and had two meanings to its name. It was where we hid from Dad, who'd curse when he bumped his head and give us a quarter if he didn't tell. My neighbor's German shepherd with wild eyes to match his heart, liked to play across the fence and make tornadoes with his tail. Every day his owner would nag, "Don't you tease my dog like that." But I never seen a happier pup. And soon he must have had enough, so he went and bit her pinky off. The next day he didn't come outside. The rose bush that popped the swimming pool and pricked my finger was too pretty not to forgive. So instead of cutting roses, we tickled them with our noses, in hopes it could forgive us too. The patio where I fell and scraped my knee and let the ants crawl between my toes, where I shot hoops with Mom and lit fireworks on the 4th, where we drew chalk murals and danced in the rain, where Jacob peed from way high in the tree, has since been stained with memories. Thank you.
Clay Spencer is an Appalachian poet from southeastern Kentucky. He holds a bachelor's in English and is a friend and fellow classmate with me in the Wendell Berry farming program of Sterling College this year.
Hello, my name is Clayton Spencer. I'm a member of the Wendell Berry farming program here at the Berry Center in Henry County, Kentucky. Before that, though, I was and am a poet from southeastern Kentucky, and I'm very grateful to be a part of the lineup for Kentucky Arts and Letters Day. I'm going to be sharing 3 poems today. This first poem is called Strange Angel. In the desert, where I have never been, I write jokes. Shadows, like ink blots, press themselves across indifferent rocks, while here in the yard, at home, my body, my house on the hill, many helicopter seeds have flung themselves onto the ground. The cardinals as red as cardinals peck at them, curling and uncurling their little necks. I think God must smell cathartic, like burning paper and dark blue ink. With the good knife, I slice the eyes off of small potatoes, the color of beach sands in winter light, and it is magnificent. It does not change my life. For this, an obstinate golden peel choreographing the day's last breaths. I am grateful. I should learn to stay this way, grateful, and also very still, the way the desert, many say, teaches us to be. Now, what about this one? Knock, knock. Who's there? Everything. Anything. It doesn't matter. Open the door. This second poem comes from an unpublished chapbook manuscript of mine that deals a lot with grief. And it's one of 3 poems that serve, they're very imagistic and they're sort of scattered throughout. They kind of work as resting points, but also as sort of points of dissociation within the manuscript. And this poem is called April 10. I come to value stillness, looking through the 8x10 frame of my double window. What is insignificant? A boy rides a plastic motorbike up and down the sidewalk during golden hour, making his mother laugh. Heavy shadows on beige brick and stucco. A dog slips through the scene. Grief. Love without a house in which to sleep and eat. Lee Bai drowned while trying to embrace a reflection of moonlight on the river's skin. It was a different date. We are asked to believe that this is who he was. A text received half an hour after I've fallen asleep reads, I miss you. At an odd hour, I reply, sorry, I was sleeping. It is not a mourning dove that has come to nest outside my window this spring, a different bird, dust brown with a smooth red breast. A match lets out a hiss, then silence, tossed in the ceramic basin. This third poem is called the Delphimorphia, which is the scientific word for possum, if you end up looking that up. I used to live in Columbus, Ohio for many years, but I'm originally from Southeast Kentucky, and this poem was written from points of homesickness, and it's dedicated to my friend Jane Hicks, who's another wonderful Appalachian poet who calls herself the Cosmic Possum. So here is De Delphimorphia for the Cosmic Possum. I want to dream about them painted realistically, the canvas hissing in a frame constructed out of love. It doesn't come. The memories walk in on five-toed hands, softly patting a deck's stripped splinters, creeping up. But they aren't about what they were once about. They aren't about a possum coming to take a little cat food in the night, the bowl half down with musty pellets, teeth fading through the dark. None of it. They address belonging. If you set a slice of pizza on the ground and say, "Try this, honey. You don't gotta eat them ticks tonight, not here," you're guaranteed to get a smile. Aren't you smiling now? In the dream about the painting, I forgot to say I wished good on them, endemic of the heart. In the dream about the painting, they are wearing their Sunday hats, piling onto a little raft, heading straight for the Golden Corral, the restaurant almost burning in the background, and it is clear they are headed south. But it doesn't come. It doesn't come. Tonight, I cried on the phone with my mother. Thank you all.
A Western Kentucky native and current Lexington resident, Jayne Moore Waldrop is the author of Retracing My Steps, which was a finalist in the 2018 New Women's Voices Chapbook Contest, and Pandemic Lent, a season in poems. Waldrop's work has appeared in literary journals such as the Anthology of Appalachian Writers, New Madrid Review, Deep South Magazine, New Limestone Review, and many more. Tonight, she is reading from her much-anticipated new novel, Drowned Town. We feel lucky to have her joining us for the first time. Please welcome Jayne Moore Waldrop.
Hi, I'm Jayne Moore Waldrop. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of Kentucky Arts and Letters Day. I'm going to read from my linked story collection, Drowned Town. View from within. Every morning before breakfast lineup, men on heavy equipment return to their work of demolishing the old town within view of Lester Elliott's cell. With the new lake rising, lapping above the ancient riverbanks, they labored with a new fury, even working weekends to finish the job. The sounds of front-end loaders and excavators came through open windows in the prison's thick stone walls, windows shaped like narrow slots designed for ventilation, not escape. The noise bothered some of the inmates who complained that they couldn't sleep for all the ruckus, but not Lester. He had always been an early riser and he liked watching life outside. From his cell on the third floor of the penitentiary, which itself rose high on a bluff above the town and river, Lester looked through his tiny slot window, the view unobstructed by mountains or trees. Across the river stood a big brick house, the only house opposite among the vast bottomland that stretched for miles. As a crow might fly across the broad and open sky, the house was directly across the Cumberland from his cell. Years ago, when Lester first arrived, a guard had told him that the distant setting was called Mint Springs, a small community situated on a narrow strip of land known as Between the Rivers, bordered by the Tennessee on the west and the Cumberland on the east. And year after year, as he served his sentence, he watched the house as seasons unfolded, as members of the farm family or field hands worked the land. To Lester, the place was like a dream, a mirage that he was unlikely to reach. The guards soon realized Lester was not a troublemaker. They treated him better than a lot of the prisoners, even gave him his choice of jobs. Every inmate had to work, but some jobs were less desirable than others. He chose the leather workshop, where he learned to make wallets and purses and belts, tooled with flowers and curlicues, which he then stained with a variety of dyes. He signed every piece by tapping his initials into a hidden spot that wouldn't mar the design. At the little shop on Water Street where inmate crafts were sold to the public, customers searched for leather pieces with an L.E. inscription. Word got around that a fellow by the name of Lester turned out quality work. In the workshop, he worked at a table next to Billy Morgan, a young thief from Lexington. 3 large windows allowed light to flood in with metal bars that didn't completely obstruct the view of the river and the town. The smell of cowhide and leather dye filled the hot, humid air. "I heard they're going to flood this place and let us all drown," Billy said. A scowl pinched the space between his eyebrows. "They can't do that," Lester said. He kept hammering. He was working on a belt with a fancy design of cactus against a desert sunset. "I don't know," Billy said. "Seems like they can do anything they want by the looks of that town." "That's the damn truth," Lester said. He stopped working and walked over to the windows. Eddyville was nearly leveled. In the last 3 years, he had watched as the town was deconstructed. The houses and businesses were gone. The people had moved away. He had heard that the dam about 10 miles downstream was finished. The water was rising. The river was becoming a lake, according to plan. He turned around and looked at Billy, who fidgeted with a piece of unworked leather, pulling it between his fingers over and over. He figured Billy was nervous because he hadn't been in long enough to have witnessed how the river regularly came up out of its banks. "The water never gets as high to reach us, even in the big floods," Lester said. He watched the town nearly go under in 1950 and again in 1957. The river came up, went back down, a rhythm he had noticed through the years. He had been told the projected lake level would get no higher than the worst of the floods. "I've seen them townspeople riding boats down Water Street in the middle of winter, cold as hell, and the water lapping up along the Rexall drugstore," he said. "Sometimes it makes me happy to be in here and not out there." "It gets up that high?" "Sure does. Be glad we're up on this hill." "Did they make you sandbag?" "In 1950 we had to. It got close to coming in the basement here." "How long you been in here, old man?" Lester wondered if Billy thought of 47 as old because he was a stupid boy, or because of the toll 20 years in this place had taken on Lester's face. When he thought about what all he had missed in life, he imagined a slow draining of his soul from his body. There wasn't much left. Maybe Billy only saw an empty old husk. "About as long as you've been alive, son," Lester said. "You ever think about getting out?" "Early on I thought about it, but I decided I didn't want to get shot. Anyway, I don't have much reason to be anywhere else. My old lady divorced me once I got here, and Mommy's dead. Besides, I hear the prison's gonna have the best lake view around." He smiled. "Wonder if they'll let us out for a swim." Billy shook his head and chuckled. "I can't swim. I never learned how." "Boy, you better hope that water stops where they say it will." After Lester worked his mandatory hours, a guard escorted him back to his cell. He stood close to the open slot window and looked across the river. This was the time of day that he loved, and his favorite view in a foreign place that had become his world. For 20 years, Lester had watched the house as the setting sun cast its warm light over the landscape. It was a fine old house, surrounded by pastures, fields of crops, and acres of forest beyond. He had watched it through the seasons and imagined what life might be like over there. When a westerly wind blew across the land, it collected the smells of grass and dirt and animals, then crossed the river toward the prison. The breeze blew through Lester's window with a freshness he attempted to capture by inhaling deeply, holding it in for as long as he could. Its purity was quickly overpowered by the stale air trapped between men and stone. From his small, high view, Lester caught sight of something different about the landscape. He leaned into the window and squinted, the skin around his eyes creasing in a fan-like pattern of wrinkles. The water inched closer to the house. Its back wing and its double porches were gone, and he spotted a pile of rubble dumped on what had been its gravel drive. Giant trees were uprooted and on the ground. The barns were down, too. The house, his oasis, was surrounded by bulldozers and tractors, its fate sealed. Lester stood at the window, looking, breathing, until his eyes and lungs were filled. Thank you very much.
Coming to us tonight from her beautiful farm outside of Sadieville, Kentucky, where she has lived for over 40 years, we are so pleased to have Marianne Taylor Hall. Marianne is the author of 2 novels, Come and Go, Molly Snow, and At the Breakers. Her short stories have appeared in publications such as the Kenyon Review, Plowshares, and the Swanee Review. And the beauty and skill of Marianne as a poet may have something to do with the fact that she's been writing poetry from the age of 10.
Okay. Hi, I'm Marianne Taylor Hall, and I'm reading to you in my studio that I shared with my husband, Jim Hall, in our house between Sadieville and Cynthiana. And I am now going to read you some poems that I've written over a course of the years. Somehow, however this planet got created or created itself, it ended up as Earth, a miracle, sunrise, sunset, mountains, forests, rivers, seas, and somewhere in there, creatures come to life, come more and more to life. And so, here is the earth, and also here are we, and even now, with many forces aiming to destroy it, fires, high winds, floods, toxic air, our earth endures, does everything it can to protect its living things, forests, sea creatures, wild animals, and also human beings, some who, if they have not lost their lives, have lived through terrible loss, their homes and everything they loved, and still they manage to go on. They want to stay. That's all this writing comes to. We love it here on earth. We want to stay. Perpetual sorrow, perpetual love for 9/11/2001. You grieving God, you hallowed God, of whom we saw the presence in the man in the blasted tower, helping the crippled woman down the stairs, knowing this care might cost him his own life. Now, here, under the drought-struck sky, full of drought-struck leaves letting go, flying crosswise on the flaming wind. Here, 20 years later, We are watching on television the ones who entered there to save what you created but could not save, only love. Love like water flowing down from the Big Dipper, a pitcher tipped to the needy earth. Though love could not put out the light, that hate, hold us near to you. Whatever is in store for us, be with us to the end. Leaves. They come from, you would almost call it nothing. They pull themselves up from below, through root and trunk and branch, emerging as the world's great matter, the weight and arching volume of the year's leaves. They come into what we call existence out of nothing, as oak, maple, hickory, ash, locust, dogwood. Somehow they take their inevitable shape. They have their fast lives as matter, at first translucent, delicate, then thickening, taking the strong light, deepening their green that is the earth's living color, rustling heavily in August winds, then turning to red and yellow and brown, and falling. They blow over the earth, they mass up against things all through the fall and winter. Some of them end up in a stairwell that leads down to a basement. That's ours. On a day in early March, that could be the first of spring, a woman comes with broom and rake. She sweeps each step, she hauls leaves by the bushel up from the well. In the wettest, deepest concrete corners, she unearths a little earth that once was leaves, that once were nothing. They hold energy in their form for a short time as they go through what we call the world, then release energy, give it up as they give up their form and turn to earth. This holding and releasing is the world's breath. The woman is in that breath too, only she doesn't know it yet. Far from it. The air is stillness, holding, silent things, listening to silence. The big gray moths spread flat and still, almost invisible against the weathered board. The unmoving new leaves of the elm, the frogs gone back under pond mud. The white sky looks finished. Where are the birds now? Hush. The light is glare and glaze. Hours, holding there. Until time sallies up the hill, sudden, blunt, like an army. An outward rush of wind, and the gauzy sky comes loose, separates, gathers into dense mounds and towers, revealing something beyond itself, a pale, distant blue. Just then, a jet, crossing east to west, rips the day open. Yes, it is Tuesday. We are not finished here. Far from it. Okay. Dawn. The world again. A purple murmur. A rumor she'd rather not hear. Her interest is elsewhere. But elsewhere is nowhere now. The urgent dream has seeped away like sleep itself. A staircase, she thinks. A hut with, was it only one window? She'd wanted to see more, but now the world comes back. Ghost dawn, creeping rain falling, leaves falling, dark falling out of the light. Light hanging in the tall, reaching, almost pleading branches of the elms. She wakes to rain. A jet up there tears open the air. Her mind is trying to find the hut, the staircase. But the elms, the rain, the morning light. The dream. The dream seeps back into the pillow. The soul, the life, the brain churning away, untouched by any obligation to reason, moderation, decency. The dream is me, unedited. The dream is my own, but I don't own it. Yet every morning before I am awake enough to notice, as darkness draws itself into the shape of a tree, and I draw myself haltingly into the shape of my familiar self, I lose that other life. I dilly-dally around the edges as the dream disintegrates. That other world, its strange, exquisite detail, trying to tell me what I need to know, is lost. That energy, that truth. And here is the familiar world. And here I am, as I know myself, awake. Nowhere else. The long, stern ridgeline of the fescue field, just visible from my window through autumn's bare branch trees, catches the western light as it begins to fall now, as it has fallen from when its valley was, at first a sea, and later a wide river rushing downward. We know its past because it left its creatures, its history, embedded in the ancient limestone that lies beneath this deep and also ancient soil. What will this soil look like in 100 years? The valley has a promise of conservation, so I know it won't get bulldozed or built upon, though a forest might take it over. Will someone mow good trails through those woods? It's terribly possible that with global warming, this all may turn into a burned-out desert. Oh, but maybe not. Maybe the rain will find it, still as it always has. Maybe someone will love this land. Maybe the widened creek will run down through the bottomland where happy cattle may graze. I imagine Indians following the traces of buffalo and deer through these same hills 2 centuries ago. I'm climbing up a trail I think they made, pretending I'm an Indian coming back, knowing exactly where I am. I call it home. I wonder if the Indians did too. Spring night. Outside, the spring night whirls and seethes. Frogs, moths, crickets, hounds baying in the distance. Full moon, the night world awakening in furious exuberance. I lie pinned to my bed, heavy, almost paralyzed, after a terrible dream. 5 men, I don't think I like this poem. 5 men in a line with bullets through their foreheads, someone's attempts at order, though I didn't see who shot them. And because of this dream, I'm the next thing to dead myself now. Where did it come from? The noisy night is still alive, exuberant around me, but the rain comes now like gentle fingers on skin, stroking to calm me and calm the world around me. I feel myself drifting downward. I fall asleep. I take those 5 men with me. I've rescued them. The bullet holes through their heads have disappeared. They thank me and, smiling, disappear themselves. You can leave that one out if you want.
John Logan Brent is a farmer in Henry County, Kentucky, where he serves his community as judge executive and sits on several local boards, including the Berry Centers. When we read his recent piece in Farming Magazine, we knew that he needed to join us for Kentucky Arts and Letters Day. And so, it is a special privilege to introduce you to our very own John Logan Brent.
Hello, my name is John Logan Brent. I'm a Henry County native. I'm the current county judge executive here in Henry County. I'm also a farmer and I serve on the board here at the Berry Center. Today I'll be reading a piece that I wrote during the COVID shutdown in April of 2020. It was a piece I'd been writing in my head for a number of years and I finally had time to put it on paper. And so I appreciate your all's being with us today, and at this time I'll proceed to read. Is there any event on the farm that can take you back to the painful memories of being a frustrated kid faster than watching a child trying to figure out how to unfasten a rusted chain catch and swing a one-way unlevel gate? The study of farm gates is problem solving 101 for a farm kid, and the syllabus is written by generations of time-starved, cash-strapped, ill-equipped, gate-hanging farmers. The thoughts of this piece come mostly at the expense of my 12-year-old son Jake, who has become one of the greatest young gate fighters the state of Kentucky has ever known. A quick inventory says there are 38 structures on our 160-acre home place that would be loosely classified as gates. There are painted gates, rusted gates, round and square tube gates, old woven wire gates, and even one antique wooden slat gate still in operation. In addition to a wide array of gate types, the means by which each one is hinged and latched is all unique in nature. In most instances, the gate is a product of a particular set of circumstances. The slope of the land, the nearby trees and rocks, and even the tools available to the farmer at the time of the hanging are all part of the equation. The reaction to these circumstances is where the farmer's creative genius is realized and where the future adventures for young gate openers are birthed. There are 2 sets of double gates on my place. Most people think double gates are installed for wide equipment. That was my original intention as well, but it turns out they were invented primarily for family entertainment. What fun it is to watch a child open one side and then run back and forth between the gates trying to keep both sides open. Over the years, I have watched my son's agility grow as he quickly looks for an ironweed or a field rock as a chalk for the first gate he opens before the other closes. The back chains or wires are not allowed on double gates as they deprive the child of exercise. One of our sets of double gates had an additional challenge, a small wasp nest. These wasps bless us with their presence each year. Killing them is put off until winter, but they never seem to bother you then. So they are forgotten until the cycle starts over again the next summer. To watch my son open and close the double gate and then latch the chains with a 4-foot-long tobacco stick surrounded by angry wasps, it makes a dad proud. There are 5 Kentucky gates on our farm. This is a classification my 80-year-old time-tested neighbor has given to any gate that has come off of one or both hinges. Maintaining a Kentucky gate requires a variety of materials, including, but not limited to, baler twine, barbed wire, chains, and smooth electric fence wire. The second most used on the place is the Kentucky gate. It was hung and rehung numerous times, but its hinges kept turning, causing the gate to fall. I finally raised the white flag about 4 years ago and tied the gate to the post. Not long after that, my son hit the gate with the tractor, bending it and thus making it permanently a Kentucky gate. The Kentucky gate's age can be told by the fading of the twine strings that have been added like tree rings over the years. The oldest gate on the place also happens to be a Kentucky gate. It is the aforementioned weathered oak slat gate. Adding to the character of this never-open far corner gate is the wooden pallet that bridges the gap between the gate and the gate post. My guess is that it will fall straight down before it falls over. In most farm families, members tend to specialize in certain tasks. Out of over 100 gates on the farms I care for, I have only hung about a dozen gates myself, and I am 47. My father is the official gate hanger. For the most part, this is fine with me because gate hanging requires time-consuming, intensive searches of tool rooms, truck floorboards, and the ground around previously hung gates for missing drill bits. The one problem with Dad's gate hanging is that he uses a level. Gates that swing freely are problematic, especially on windy days. I would rather pitch hay on a blazing hot August afternoon than climb off a tractor to open and shut gates. To me, it is the second most unenjoyable task on a farm next to chasing cattle, which usually happens because I was too lazy to climb off the tractor and shut a gate. One positive attribute of the Kentucky gate is that its lack of hinges assures that it will stay open long enough to drive through. Also, I feel better knowing my son Jake is building his muscles as he struggles to drag a heavy unhinged gate across the rocks. No discussion would be complete without some attention to fastening systems. The latch tells the story of the farmer, his time constraints, his sense of pride, and even the farm's prosperity. I had the privilege of buying my neighbor's farm from his children after his passing. He was 94 when he died and had never lived anywhere except on those 66 acres. He farmed as one should, with care, pride, and time to do things right. There are numerous 60-year-old red cedar and locust gate posts on the farm with styles of chains and catches long gone from the hardware stores. These chains and posts have outlasted many a gate and will hold closed many a gate to come. A couple of winters ago, I made it my project to put proper chains on all my gates. $100 and a few hours later, I had about half of them done. The new chains allow me to remove enough leftover pieces of wire to properly tie off the other half of the gates on the farm, which was progress indeed. The remaining chainless gates will give me and the local farm store something to look forward to. Unhooking a gate is probably the most difficult task for a kid because no gate ever hooks exactly the same. If I had $1 for every time I have yelled, "Lift up, Jake," or "Put your foot on it, son," this eases the pressure on the chain, thus allowing it to be unhooked. I could buy a truckload of new gates. Watching a 12-year-old try to untie a wet double-knotted baler twine or twist a piece of wire the wrong way would give the most patient teacher gray hairs. Yelling out the truck window to "Hurry up" always seems to help kids perform in these situations. Many gates allow for multiple latching options. We take care of the cattle on the family farm, my dad and his two brothers. Much to the despair of my son, each of them latch the front entry gate differently. My father wraps the chain twice around the gate and hooks it to a staple on the back of the gate post. My Uncle Bob lifts the gate up as he closes it, puts a chain under one of the pipes, fastens the chain, and lets the gate down, thus putting pressure on the chain. My late Uncle Don would wrap the chain around the gate several times and latch the chain to a nail on the front of the post. When you think how many ways there are to use a long chain, you can visualize the twinkle in these old men's eyes as they play the chain game with my son. Jake has not mastered all the gate systems on the farms yet, but after 8 years of hands-on training, he is close. I still haven't had the opportunity to teach him how to get an iced-over frozen catch open in the winter with breast spit or a rock. For the time being, I'll continue to teach and offer the standard, "Hurry up, Jake, I haven't got all day." Silently, though, I find myself saying more and more, "I sure will miss these days, son." Thank you, and also I wanted to mention that this is published in Farming Magazine out of Holmes County, Ohio. Thank you for your time.
Ronald Davis, also known as Up From Some Dirt, is an award-winning visual artist and poet based in Lexington, Kentucky. His work has been exhibited throughout Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, and Tennessee, on the cover of publications such as the African American Review and the Tidal Basin Review, and his own collections of poetry, To Emmett Till, and Defying a Total Darkness. We are pleased to have him join us tonight for the first time. Please welcome Ronald Davis.
Hello, I'm Up From Some Dirt, and I would like to thank the Berry Center for this invitation to read for the virtual Kentucky Arts and Letters Day. I'm going to read for you 2 poems. The first one, How Saplings Learn to Face the Sun, for Paul D. and Sethi. Ours is a fairy tale unlike none. Oh, what a grim brother would have given to pen such a love, rumored softly to reroute pain. Back upon back we embrace, scar stretching into scar, twin trees and skin's damp ecology, keloids leech-like, cascade into black, becoming bark. Their limbs entwined, a shrine for our love. The ripe soul falls like fruit at the feet of dear Olaroon. The heavens are so hungry. Quickly, my love, go fetch for us a boundless basket. Horizons branch between our flesh and our sleep. The heavens are so hungry. The gods all dine on our carpals and mesocarps, each mouth a moon to suckle memory. Our spiritual suffrage their lave, where the living only are elected for love's velveteen office. In our voices, the seasons are changing. In the branches of our scars, the Bennu hatches, quakes, ignites. Bus fare for a Valkyrie. Question, where are the brazen poems lashing apocryphal authorities with fire in countermeasure to police brutality? The lit fuse in physical flight as metaphor for swinging, breathing, driving, singing, ruses and muses. A sundressed child, black and tan, handcuffed to a carousel, quietly dismantles, quietly smiles face down at a colony of ants, dismantling cookies into a cosmos of crumbs. The armored cop above her takes a knee to her back, taking selfies with rip-roaring laughter while a volley of spectators look on, YouTube's benign gorilla loaf. I've known poems to vibrate like the glass plate of a CVS, but never go viral enough to checkmate white supremacy, or assimilate an assembly of SWAT teams into final submission. There are no poems burning literal hell through a Kevlar vest, like snipers for a black mass and self-sentience. Never has a poem been written that kills its enemy, for I have tried and failed. Free verse like drone strikes in service of the disenfranchised. And even when writing of pink unicorns in utopian gardens of mint, my quivers are concussed. A schizophrenic sun foams over the earth and the stars pull out their hair, screaming until hoarse into the night. An apoplectic moon hoards its fullness and never surrenders its wane to the sea. Our civil suppositions were written in the shadows of a lynching. This plague of democracy, a puzzle where Holocaust performs due diligence, monopolizing all conjectures on race. So how do I justify to progeny my simple trove of poems? Huzzah, discordant verse as balm for the rope burns around your neck. this inheritance of long, jarring prose, overworked sonnets to a disemboweled lover, this recherche for revenge, a pate of Pegasus, children abandoned by civility, please come forward and have your fill. Muses and ruses. How does the code-switching poet decry existential nihilism without jeopardizing a genius grant? Answer. From the skull of an anglerfish, Etoliate from edacious hunger, the head of the pink unicorn dangles like bait. Thank you.
Next, we are pleased to bring you a reading from beloved and acclaimed Kentucky writer Bobbie Ann Mason, author of such favorites as Shiloh and Other Stories, Feather Crowns, and The Girl in the Blue Beret. Tonight, she will be reading from her latest novel, Dear Anne. It is an honor to introduce Bobbie Ann Mason.
Hello. I would like to read to you something from my novel, Dear Anne. I'm so happy to be here at the Kentucky Arts and Letters Day once again. Sorry we can't be there in person. Someone told me that if you write fiction about a drug experience, you really should keep it to one paragraph. Well, I had already written a whole chapter, and if you will indulge me, I will read you the scene. Jimmy and Anne are going on an acid trip. Jimmy is Anne's new boyfriend. They are graduate students at Stanford University in 1967. Their friend Chip is going to be their guide for the trip because otherwise, well, Chip, their guide for the trip, had assembled some special items: a kaleidoscope, a book of Escher drawings, a Stockhausen album. He patted Anne on the head. Remember, if you freak out, I'll be here. Jimmy will be here. This woolly blanket will be right here if you're cold. I'll make hot, soothing tea. I'll bring giant sandwiches. Your wish is my command. Oh, cut it out, Chip, said Jimmy, laughing. It'll be a nice, quiet, loose day. Very ungrammatical. You'll be bored out of your gourd. You can sit there with your slide rule and calculate the universe. He mimicked Chip working his slide rule like a guitar. Jimmy said to Anne, and at the end, you can sleep with Chip if you want to. Don't be absurd, she laughed. Why not? Chip's a good guy. He's taking care of us. I can share. You're teasing, aren't you? Jimmy grinned and fluffed her hair. I'm just kidding. Don't be a prude, Anne, she remembered someone saying. Anne had been holding in her mind the thought of sex on acid with Jimmy. Jimmy had spruced up his bedroom. From the overhead light fixture and along the walls, he had draped an orange and white silk emergency parachute he had gotten from Army surplus. He had anchored the billowy silk along the walls with chairs, books on the bookshelves and safety pins on the blinds. It was a haphazard canopy over a love nest, and he had scattered some colorful pillows on the bed. Chip disappeared for a half hour, returning with a lavish bouquet from the florist. Jimmy found a milk jug for the flowers. The bouquet was a grand assortment like a Flemish still life. For texture and color, Chip said. Jimmy made bacon and eggs for the three of them. Start out with a good breakfast, Chip said. My mom always said start every day with a good breakfast. One thing I do know is how to make breakfast, Jimmy said. And Chip said, I'm just going to hang out here and work on some analyses until you feel like going to the redwoods, Chip said later. The acid was on postage stamps, one for Anne and one for Jimmy. She licked the stamp, rolled her tongue around her mouth as Chip instructed, sipped some water. I want to save the stamp for my collection, she said. She set it on a shelf above the bathroom sink to dry. Jimmy swished water in his mouth. Anything happening? He asked. So soon? He held her close to him. I'm right here. It's going to be superlative, magnolious. I'm here all the way. Jimmy was good to her. She felt herself letting go, but Jimmy's arm was shrinking. His shirt was falling off, its shape turning into a cloud, shifting in a fast wind. It slithered to the floor, a white, formless thing. Then a surprise heave. Her breakfast shot to the floor, barely altered. Chip was sopping it with paper towels. A Pollock painting, he said, as Anne watched yellow and brown colors mix and disappear. The colors were fascinating. Are you all right? Jimmy said. Let's steady ourselves. Sit here. Do you feel better? I'm just ducky. Jimmy's face was a frog staring at her bug-eyed. Then the big eyes were those of a cat, smiling knowingly, like the sly boots Cheshire. Let's study the flowers, Jimmy said. Is there a quiz? California flowers, a mountain of them, grand and intricate multiple jigsaw puzzles, like a millefiori paperweight. She was lost on the petal of a daisy. A drop of water glistened on it. Tiny flecks of pollen had dispersed on the surface of the petal, and their absorption by the drop of water was imminent. She would wait to observe this phenomenon from her perch in eternity. Knowing she had all of time, she relaxed, flooded with euphoria. Suddenly, the Lonely Hearts Club band appeared through the doorway, marching in place, then marching forward. Sergeant Pepper was directing the band with his slide rule. Billy Shears sounds just like Ringo, she said. Her words seemed yellow and brown, like her eggs and bacon. She would get by with a little help from her friends. They were looking out for her. She had never felt so secure, so loved. John, Paul, and George sang behind Ringo in a high-pitched refrain, loving and innocent. They sang out of another age, where there were bandstands and susatubas and kind neighbors. At the end of the song, Jimmy stood and gave Sergeant Pepper a military salute. Chip, saluting too, retreated into the kitchen. During Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Chip handed Anne the kaleidoscope, and she watched the geometric dazzle through Lucy's eyes. He lit a strobe candle on the bedside table. Anne and Jimmy were lying on the bed, eyes to the flickering canopy. A spherical paper lantern that had covered the light fixture rolled on the bed like a tumbleweed. Inside it, dust fluttered in strings. Shadows roamed the silk walls. She's leaving home was ineffably sad. It was effably Anne. She had left home on a Wednesday morning very early, tiptoeing out of the house with her handkerchief. Her parents finding her note and blaming themselves. What could they have done better? Didn't they know her? How could they have misunderstood? She felt tears for the girl in the song, for the bereft parents, for the man in the motor trade. But then it was clear that this man would treat her badly, use, rob, jilt, abandon, hurt. The parents were right. The girl went with the man to the carnival, of course. Mr. Kite was the headliner, jumping, sailing through hogsheads, hoops of fire, which Anne could clearly envision. But Mr. Henderson's 10 Somersets would be a true wonder. She loved doing summersets when she was little. The record seemed to turn itself over. Within You, Without You ambled slowly, a brittle sound with sparkles. The song lasted for about 2 months. Her eyes ranged through every pore and fold of the silk ceiling. She couldn't fathom being 64. It was such a funny idea. Paul sang so sweetly, as if from an imagined time, some distant future, maybe on the deck of a large ship cruising to a balmy isle. Her laugh led her to lovely, happy Rita. Maybe it was Rita who had run off to meet the man in the motor trade. Now she was happy and free of him, but still in the motor trade, so to speak. Checking her line of meters and then having tea. Anne was hardly aware of Jimmy until Good Morning began with the farmyard sounds. Jimmy and his drawings of Bugs and Porky and the farmer Fudd. Pigs, chickens in the henhouse in Kentucky, gamboling spring calves. Home was far away. That home, undulating, blue and green, the scent of gardenias on the porch. She could hear her mother calling the pigs. A pitch-black thought interrupted the holes in Blackburn, Lancashire. A field of landmines, helmeted figures running across, strafing sounds above. Strafing. There had been so much strafing lately. She said that aloud. Don't worry about strafing, Jimmy said, lying beside her, staring at the ceiling. She had to pee, didn't she? By the time the last note of the last song faded, she felt she had been on a phantasmagoric journey in Wonderland with Alice. They flung darts at Jimmy's dartboard until Chip stopped them. Then they ate peaches and sucked the pits. Later, Chip gave them fascinating orange popsicles. Anne hadn't realized Chip had brought them. I bought them, Jimmy explained when she inquired. What difference does it make? Why do you have to get everything straight, all worked out in rows? Maybe they brought themselves. Maybe they flew. Shut up, Jimmy, said Chip. Anne didn't like what Jimmy said. She didn't speak for a while. Maybe she was too organized, but she hadn't realized that bothered him. Here, let's listen to Stockhausen, said Chip, a change of mood. Anne and Jimmy sat on the couch and closed their eyes while Stockhausen played, freaky tape loops and eerie graveyard sounds. Anne couldn't tell whether to cough or swallow. Her breathing was off, not quite right. She felt that something was trying to get out. Oh, man, said Jimmy. Man, oh, man, said Jimmy. Thank you.
Former Kentucky Poet Laureate Frank X. Walker is a professor in the Department of English and the African American and Africana Studies program at the University of Kentucky, and the founding editor of Pluck, the Journal of Appalachian Arts and Culture, and is the co-founder of Appalachian Poets. He is the author of 9 collections of poetry, including Turn Me Loose, The Unghosting of Medgar Evers, winner of the 2014 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Poetry, and Buffalo Dance, The Journey of York, winner of the Lillian Smith Book Award. It is an honor to be joined once again by Frank X. Walker.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Virginia and Ben and Tanya and Wendell for inviting me yet again to the Berry Center, even in this format. I hope that the magic Ben pulls off here can somehow be a close proximity to the magic we've always created this time of the year at the Berry Center when we take over downtown for poetry and literature. I'm going to read some poems that will be added to the new revised edition of Buffalo Dance that comes out from University Press of Kentucky next year. And for those who don't know who York is, you probably know Lewis and Clark, but York was a manservant who was owned by William Clark. And when I say Lewis and Clark, I'm talking about the famed expedition that has very strong Kentucky connections. This first poem is Clark around the fire with the men bragging about his life back in Kentucky. Lie of omission. Master Clark almost sing about the great house left to him by his father while swapping lies round the fire at night. He draw a picture in the air for Master Lewis and others of the 2 floors and 6 rooms with chimneys that sit on the great log cabin like ears on a mule. Then he add the outside kitchen with more pots and pans than our small army can carry. The always full smokehouse, the busy steel, and its stacks of white oak barrels, the root cellar, spring house, barns, grist mill, and miles of fencing. But he don't say who family built it, who care for the livestock and gardens, or who grow, prepare, and serve the food. He don't say who carry all the water or chop enough wood to keep 4 fireplaces blazing all winter. He don't say who hoe, plant, shuck, grind, or cook the corn mash. He sing like Mulberry Hill just got up one day and built itself, while me, old York, Rose, Nancy, Juba, and 3 other bonded men just stood there and watched. One of the things I imagine him doing is talking about the Haitian Revolution around the fire. I imagine it was a long time before the fear of an American version of that, ever really went away. So this is York speaking. This particular poem has an epigraph by Sylvanus Bourne in a letter to Thomas Jefferson, which goes, "They have burned and laid waste to all the plantations. Their whole plan is marked with bitter resentment for former injuries. A rock, a fort, an island." After several nights of whispering round the fire about Santo Domingo, Sacagawea's dove eyes change birds, but not to chicken like them hope. The monster they try to plant in her head don't grow. She remember how I stand behind her, sharpening my long knife to cut short the reach of so many uninvited eyes every time she bare a breast to feed her son. So she look up at my hawk with her owl and see a rock, a fort, an island full of rifles and machetes, feel safe and fear nothing white or French or Indian. This next poem imagines York and Sacagawea's relationship deepening, their friendship deepening over the 3 years on the journey. This is called Not the Only One. Studying Sacagawea's face and hands, I see her lips twist up and give way to something that tastes like sorrow after fishing for answers to questions we don't have enough words for. Something in her eyes tell me she wants to know how it feels to be the onlyest one. And if I ever ache from loneliness like her, I nod and point to the looking glass she traded for and try to show how I can feel my mother's soft eyes when I smile and see my father in my own nose and mouth. I point to the first night star, then at her, back to the star, then me, and make signs for her to look up again after the moon make its way across the sky. In the deep of the night, I know her heart will swell when she look up at the sparkling herd and find herself among all her people too. There's a theme that deals with literacy and the power connected to literacy that runs through all the texts, all three collections of the York story. This one is called Traveling Men. York speaking. I watched a white man's face when they turn the leaves in a book and come to understand that reading can be like taking a journey in your head. When Master Clark fingered the words, he seemed to take no pleasure in it. When Master Lewis' face said he, a just married man, finally at home alone with his bride. He get lost in books and drift so far away, no amount of ruckus round the fire or calling his name seemed to reach him. Sometime he returned after closing the pages and rub his stomach like a man who just swallowed a good meal. I wonder if he traveled to the same place old York go when telling our people's stories, or the place bonded men go when they talk about what they're gonna do when free, then close their eyes and taste it. Several of these new poems also intensified the difference between Clark and York and life as an enslaved man and as a slave master. And this particular poem is called Superman and can also be read super inhumane. York speaking. Master Clark acted surprised and huffed at my fatigue after our long walk, though I carry all of his supplies and mine. When I feel sickly, I still works. He roll his eyes from the back of the horse he riding at my grumbling about my feet hurting. Sometimes he think I be more than human. Sometimes he treat me like I be much, much less. This next one is for all the bourbon lovers. This is called Cure for Homesickness. Captain Lewis stick his nose in the cup while Captain Clark turned his up at any whiskey not squeezed from mostly corn, barley, or rye. But the 9 young men from Kentucky drown all of their sorrows and pretend not to miss home by arguing till all the stars come out over whose liquor make you blind, burn a hole in your throat, or kick like a mule. 3 more reasons than I need to stay married to my canteen of cold spring water instead. And this last poem I'll read would be placed after the shortest poem in the collection already, which is about York and the first night back with his wife after 3 years away. This new poem is the morning after that night. It's called Night Breaks, Freedom Too. I wake up alone on the Buffalo Road. I sent my wife believing I dreamed this homecoming. Then I smell the air and the quilt and swallow my hurt because I know half my dream come true. House servants tip through the dark from the kitchen and back cabins before the rooster have a chance to crow. Slave owners expect to wake to warm biscuits, bacon frying, and coffee already blessing the air. They expect full bathtubs, clean rags, fresh clothes, and shine boots as soon as they touch the floor. Servant work be from can't see to can't see, lest the master or some other boss man need some special service. So we learn to enjoy our freedom whenever we can find it. We learn early, you can't take it with you. Thank you.
Next up is a Kentucky Arts and Letters Day favorite, Maurice Manning. Maurice is a professor of English and creative writing at Transylvania University and the author of 6 books of poetry, including Lawrence Booth's Book of Visions, which was selected for the 2000 Yale Series of Younger Poets, and The Common Man, which was one of 3 finalists for the 2011 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. Tonight, Maurice joins us with more than poetry, and we know you'll enjoy the show.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Kentucky Arts and Letters Day, organized and celebrated annually by the Berry Center in Newcastle, Kentucky. My name's Maurice Manning, and I'm going to read a few tall tale hillbilly poems to you. This first one is called That Jebby Meeks is an Insult and Blight Upon Creation. Well, Pappy didn't have his teeth in, and Mammy had just mashed a chaw in the whisker-stubbly pouch of her jaw, but neither one can muster a lick of sense, they're such a gabby brood. So whatever they were saying sounded like a goat in the throes of hacking up a thistlethorn he liked to die to quit it sticking in his gullet, and little sister was worrying something awful with a wad of sassafras pinched like a bit betwixt her teeth, and kindly flopping about like a fritter in a skillet to stave her monthly meanness off. But I could have told her she'd have to chew a tree to get the meanness out, and Jebby was over there in the corner in the gloomy midst of a coax and a plea of fiddling with a baby possum he said he aimed to teach how to smoke a corncob pipe, the poor critter, and every damned one of the bunch, the sons of bitches and whatever a womanly son of a bitch is called, said, "Why, folks will pay cash money to see a possum smoke a pipe. It's such a lively entertainment, and we could use a poke of money round here to spriten up the place or spring for Mammy's razor blades." And Pappy mumbled through his gums. He knew he shouldn't swell with pride, but it did him a world of good to see his loins had finally produced a chap of upright enterprise and ambition. And I said, "Who in hell could tie a possum to ambition?" And Pappy said, "Why, Jebby, I reckon, just watch that bitty possum puff. It gives a body satisfaction to see that little feller go." And about that time, in walks my woman, or the woman who used to be my woman, Luella, twitching her hind end like the bob of a granddaddy clock, and said she thought it was cute as a bug that Jebby had a little friend, and finally found direction in his life that previously had been a maze. And I said, "Luella, the only direction you need to fussle with is out, and I'd be obliged if you'd persuade your twitchy hind end not to tarry." I reckon that sent her on her way. And then I glared at Jebby and said, "If you're so bent on teaching possums a practical art, why don't you teach him how to operate a broom? This place is hardly a notch above a sty and would sorely benefit from the application of a sweep." But Jebby, the little shote, fixed me. "Now any ninny can plainly see," he said, affecting a showman's glee, "this here's a left-handed possum, and last I noticed the broom we lean in the corner to keep it company is not the left-handed kind, and besides, the handle's a pinch too long." Then Pappy gummed, "You tell it, Jebby. Now just because among the Meekses you're keen to articulate a page of words entire whenever you spring that trap in the middle of your face," Pappy almost glowered at me, "don't make you fatter than a tick on smarts, nor raise your wit a stitch. Remember who you come from, boy. Your mammy and I have had to spread what little wisdom God give us around like thin and hopeful gravy, and Jebby's finally sopped some up, and that there possum's all the proof that Jebby's coming up in the world. You oughtn't be glad for your blood kin amounting to something after all." But I just couldn't make my mind agree that Jebby Meeks and a possum amounted much to anything but a waste of time and a decent pipe, for who would want to smoke that thing after a possum slobbered on it? And what in hell is hopeful gravy? And meanwhile, Jebby had dressed his friend in overalls like a man person, and I couldn't handle any more. I'd long suspected slack-jawed Jebby was Pappy's peach, his cherished son, so I went out to the chicken coop to suffer shame and dejection. But it was hotter than the devil's breath in there, and besides, it also stunk. So I crawled up under a bubby bush with the chiggers and other varmints to sulk. But sulking wasn't near enough. So I prayed a curse on Jebby that his dressed-up possum friend would choke. And though he didn't choke in the least, some of my anguish was relieved because I got it out of me. And if I carry around the sin of wishing harm on someone else, it hasn't been a breaking burden or sullied my conscience much, because I know the Lord, giver of life, never intended a possum to smoke, unless the possum was getting cooked. So if one was in the wrong, it might be me. But mostly it was Jebby, the rake, who'd gone so far astray. Here's one about another dubious family called the Crookshanks, a somber and ponderous legacy. The Crookshanks were a slovenly bunch, and Clovis Crookshank had made no effort whatever to instill the virtue of deportment either in himself or the spawn of his glands, which charity and compassion for the human struggle requires, with certain hesitation, to name the leggy beasts his children. Why, Pappy, whatever in the world would we do with it if anything that could be called deportment showed up around this broken-down piss-mire of a heap we Crookshanks call our home? The eldest little Crookshank intoned one day. This ain't a place for deportment. This is a place for people who cuss and fight and scratch and holler and pinch. Plus, we Crookshanks like to toot, and deportment don't allow no toots. Borned with wisdom twixt his ears, the paterfamilias approved, and that, for the Crookshanks settled the matter of deportment and whether they should make an effort won in that regard. Despite such promise for wit or merit or promise of any kind, however, to a person, the Crookshank outfit was dull, incurious, and feeble, and lacked whatever qualities that might have helped them rise at least a whit as might on the ladder of purpose or achievement or other reasons for being. Being a settler of Irishman's Creek, which was storied in its way and remote, was reason enough for Clovis Crookshank to claim the purpose or lack of purpose of his being was long ago fulfilled, and he lived with happy satisfaction that his life was what it was, and cared not a fig what others might have thought. Clovis Crookshank just went on without so much as a howdy do, or fare thee well, or sakes alive, or whatever homespun sobriquet you want to apply to the situation, which wasn't a proper situation in the first place. It was a dismal, shameful, barely speakable abuse of what in basic terms is called reality. But reality hardly applied to Clovis Crookshank or any of his shiftless brood. By far more lively and compelling than any human were his pets, foremost of which was an able dog, a one-eyed coonhound named Jesus H. Christ, or, if you want to be complete, Jesus H. Christ Crookshank, should a dog have any feeling at all about having a last name. Snoopers and thieves were well advised to stay away from the place because Clovis would sick Jesus on them. As he said to one interloper, "Do you or do you not intend to rob me or pilfer from my patch?" And if the would-be robber said, "Aye," then Clovis would just say, "Sick 'em, Jesus," which soon persuaded the robber to change his mind. Now, Jesus wasn't vicious, but he was a sizable dog, and once he got a loose, it wasn't clear what he would do, as was the case with the original way-back Jesus. Clovis was always his own person, surrounded by his critters, all of whom were black as night, and then there was Three-Ball Ike, the tomcat, so named because one of the Crookshanks felt around down there and counted them, if you can imagine such a thing, for which Clovis was jubilant, because he said that having an extra gland would put more passion in Ike for mice and rats, the occasional weasel or squirrel, and keep the place respectable, as if in social circles sporting a tomcat packing three in the poke, as they say, could somehow be twisted or contorted to become a symbol or fact or semblance of respect. But after all, we're talking about the Crookshanks, a tribe of people on whom the term eccentric would slide like butter down a hot knife and slip into a puddle of goo, by which point a normal person would be happy for a biscuit crumb to sop it up and let it be, and leave the Crookshanks to themselves. And that, as far as anyone can say, is where they are today. I'm going to read one more called Picking Time with the Scarecrow. We've been invited to the dream where the bees hover in and out of the opening halfway up the locust tree above the reach of twisted trumpet vine, and drops of rain still splat on fallen leaves. A downy feather drifts, but a puff of breeze below tarries its fall. Season of fog, season of mists, season of ending, season of sleep. Time to be awake to time, time to repair, time to lay by, and time to let the dying die. And lesson we're all a-fixin' to die, let's all set back and give a hear to the sploosh and plunk of a walnut dropping into a deep pool in the stream, and dream of where it might end up, for the water will carry it along to Jitter Branch or Rapture, the Sinks or Copperhead, Sublimity or Providence or Good Hope, or even on to Double Creek, the places that people who struggled to be alive have given living names. Lesson hits time to die. Let's listen to all these names of places named. How beggars' lice and briars were made to stick. It must have been the God who made the world contraption intended a thing or two to be persistent, and persistence isn't far from stubborn. A spring breeze isn't in the air. It's a harder wind with a chill behind. I say it's not a time to fear, but time to be awake to time, and time to listen, time to tell, if you have one, the story in your heart. In the hazy patch of green, you see a scarecrow overgrown with vines. You can kneel before it like a shrine, though no monument to a martyr man, but to a human way to stand in the world and belong to the world and time. The only prologue is the truth. To understand the world and face our common fix and place, we tell a story and stretch it out with joy. We make a tale from nothing and send it fluttering like a butterfly into the world to be alive. Some tales are poor and low, beset with the bad enunciation blues, but somehow the telling turns it out, and what needs to be heard survives the tale. The best tales clack along without a hint or sign of ever ending, and we just hear them clatter away into the distance where they go. My friends and neighbors hear me say, we're going on a pilgrimage, but we're only going down the way. Reckon we'll pass the church house too, the swing low, end of time, holy motion, house of love and suffering, slain in the spirit that's true. And you can hear the singing there of lonely voices or a chorus. But farther down we'll come to a place with the scarecrow clad in vines and a hat and an old porch haunted by 3 black cats. That's where the little girl lived who toted the laden egg basket to the country store and sold the eggs, and where, in the gloomy barn beside the house, someone coolly drawled, "Slicker 'n owl shit," and the one who heard it as plain as a bell tolling for wretched death fished in his pocket to wet the lead of a pencil stub with his tongue before he wrote it down. An expression he heard now to remember, meaning any number of things, though in this triumph in the barn it meant a trouble fretted over and worrisome to no end of study had, with a little spunk, been solved. And the old man clapped his thigh to say, "Now then, that oughtn't learn you good, you shank-legged son of a bitch." The trouble involved a determined rooster whose given name was Abraham. Under the tree is where we'll go and where we'll be. A body burns with passion or rage, but a body burns with pure delight. And maybe that's a way to fight. Another thing I ought to mention. I know my way around a banjo, and a banjo is a machine that kills despair, kills it graveyard dead, as people in the country say. I say it too because it's true. If you keep a banjo on the place, despair runs off and hides its face. And the Scarecrow had a name I'll rhyme. We liked to call him Father Time. Now don't lope off flustered and puny, my friends, for no ill fate was met by Abraham, though he was stout enough to stuff a fine pillow to lay beneath a lady's head, or gussy up her feather bed. He met no malice. He only needed to have his spurs filed down with a rasp, the sassy Dominicker varlet, and the trouble was getting him to concede, not that roosters are known to be conceders, but are widely known to stub and strut. It would be a gentler affair if only he'd still himself, which he did, after the man began singing a song about a fox and his hungry babes, and where the fox might roam at night to fetch and feed his family right. And Abraham sat there in a spell. And that is all there is to tell.
And finally, we are joined by Wendell Berry. Wendell is the author of more than 30 books of poetry, fiction, and essays, written primarily from his home in Henry County, Kentucky. Tonight, he is reading a selection from his short story collection, Fidelity, 5 Stories. In this collection, the reader meets the fictional community of Port William and follows their stories across generations. Because of this book's importance to the work of the center, and in celebration of the Berry Center's 10th anniversary, Fidelity, 5 Stories has been chosen as the book for the 2021-22 Agrarian Literary League. This means that free copies of Fidelity have been made available to the residents of Henry County who will be reading together in small groups and will be invited to attend larger gatherings hosted by the Berry Center, as soon as such things are safe. You can find out more about this rural reading program by visiting www.berrycenter.org. Now here's Wendell.
I'm going to read from my story, Fidelity. Danny woke cold and hungry. He was lying on his back with his arms folded on his chest. He had slept perhaps 2 hours, and he had not moved. Nor had anything moved in the barn or in the wooded hollow around it, so far as he could tell, except the little stream of stepstone, which continued to make the same steady song it had been making when he fell asleep. A few crickets sang. The air was still, and in openings of the mist that had gathered in the hollow, he could see the stars. Though he was cold, for several minutes he did not move. He loved the stillness and was reluctant to break it. An owl trilled nearby, and another answered some distance away. Danny turned onto his side to face the opening of the doorway, pillowed his head on his left forearm, and taking off his cap, ran the fingers of his right hand slowly through his hair. He yawned, stretched, and got up. Taking the flashlight, he went into where Burley lay and shone the light on him. Nothing had changed. The old body breathed on with the same steady yet forceless and shallow breath. Danny saw at once all he needed to see, and yet he remained for a few moments, shining the light. And he said again in his mind, "These are the last things now. Everything that happens now happens for the last time in his life. He reached out with his hand and took hold of Burley's shoulder and shook it gently, as if to waken him, but he did not wake. "It'll soon be morning," he said aloud. "I'm hungry now. I need to make a fire and fix a little breakfast before the light comes. We can't send up any smoke after daylight. I'll be close by." He gathered dry scraps of wood from the barn floor, and then he pried loose a locust tear-pole with the bark still on it, and rapidly cut it into lengths with the axe. Just outside the doorway, he made a small fire between two rocks on which he set his skillet. By the light of the flashlight, he sliced a dozen thick slices from the joel and started several of them frying. He crossed the creek to where a walled spring flowed out of the hillside. He found the rusted coffee can that he kept there, dipped it full and drank, and then dipped it full again. Carrying the filled can, he went back to his fire, where he knelt on one knee and attended to the skillet. The birds had begun to sing, and the sky was turning pale above the eastward trees. When all the meat was fried, he set the skillet off the fire. With water from the spring and grease from the fried meat, he moistened some cornmeal and made 6 hoe cakes, each the size of the skillet. When he was finished with his cooking, he took the pair of surgical gloves from his pocket and stirred them in the fire until they were burned. He brought water from the creek then and put out the fire. He divided the food carefully and ate half of it. He ate slowly and with pleasure, watching the light come. Movement, fire, and now the food in his belly had taken the chill out of his flesh. But fall was in the air that morning, and he welcomed it. The day would be clear and fine, and more would come, brisk, bright, dark-shadowed days, colored by the turning leaves, days that would call up the hunter feeling in him. Suddenly he remembered Elton Penn walking into the woods under the stars of a bright, frosty night, half singing as his way was, "Clear as a bell, cold as hell, and smells like old cheese." Now Elton was 3 years dead. As Danny watched, the light reddened and warmed in the sky. The last of the stars disappeared. Above him on both sides of the hollow, the wet leaves of the treetops began to shine among the fading strands and shelves of mist. Eastward, the mist took a stain of pink from the rising sun and glowed. And Danny felt a happiness that he knew was not his at all, that did not exist because he felt it, but because it was here, and he had returned to it. He carried his skillet to the creek, scoured it out with handfuls of fine gravel that he found there, and left it on a rock to dry. He picked his way through the young thicket growth closing around the barn, and entered the stand of old trees that covered the south slope. There the great trees stood around him, the thready night mist caught in their branches, and every leaf was still. When the first white man in this place, the first Coulter or Catlett or Feltner or whoever it was, had passed through this crease of the hill, these trees were here, and the stillness in which they stood and grew had been here forever. Timber cutters in recent years had had their eye on these trees and had approached Burley about harvesting them. "I reckon you had better talk to Danny here," Burley said, and Danny smiled that completely friendly, totally impenetrable style of his and merely shook his head. Now Danny was looking for a place well in among the big trees, and yet not too far from the creek, or too readily accessible to the eye. His study took him a while, but finally he saw what he was looking for. Under a tall, straight chinkapin that was sound and not too old, a tree that would be standing a long time, there was a shallow trough in the ground, left perhaps by the uprooting of another tree a long time ago. The place was open and clear of underbrush, but could not be seen except against a patch of thicket around a windfall. Danny stood and thought again to test his satisfaction, and was satisfied. As he turned away, he noticed, strung between two saplings, the dew-beaded orb of a large orange spider. He stopped to look at it and found the spider's home, a sort of tube fashioned of two leaves and not easy to see, where the spider could withdraw to sleep or take shelter from the rain. It would not be long, Danny thought, before the spiders would have to go out of business for the winter. Soon there would be hard frosts, and the webs would be cumbered and torn by the falling leaves. Sunlight now filled the sky above the shadowy woods. He went back to the barn, preoccupied with his thoughts, and so he was startled on entering the stripping room by Burley's opened eyes looking at him. He stopped, for the force of his surprise was almost that of fright, and then he went over to the bench and laid his hand on Burley's. Burley's eyes were perfectly calm. He was smiling. Slowly, pausing to breathe between phrases, he said, "I allowed you'd get here about the same time I did." "Well, you were right," Danny said. "We made it. Do you know where you are?" Again, smiling, Burley spoke, his voice so halting and weak as to seem not uttered by bodily strength at all, but by some pure presence of recollection and will. "Right here." He was quoting himself as the hero of an old joke and an old story in which, lost on a night hunt, his companions had asked him where they were, and he had said, "Right here." "You're right again," Danny said, knowing that Burley did know where he was. "Are you comfortable? Is there anything you want?" This time Burley only said, "Drink." He turned his head a little and looked at the treetops beyond the window. Danny said, "I'll go to the spring." At the spring he drank and then dipped up a drink for Burley. When he returned, Burley's eyes were closed again, and he looked more deeply sunk within himself than before. It was as though his soul, like a circling hawk, had swung back into this world on a wide curve, to look once more out of his eyes at what he had always known, and to speak with his voice, and then had swung out of it again, the curve widening. Danny stood still, holding the can of water. He could hear Burley's breath coming slower than before, tentative and unsteady. Danny listened. He picked up Burley's wrist and held it, and then he shouldered his tools and went up into the woods and began to dig. Working with a spade, Danny cut into the ground the long and narrow outline of the grave. It was hard digging, the gentle rain of the night not having penetrated very far, and there were tree roots and rocks. Danny soon settled into a rhythm in keeping with the length and difficulty of the job. He used the spud bar to loosen the dirt, cut the roots, and pry out the rocks. With the spade, he piled the loosened dirt on one side of the grave. With his hands, he laid the rocks out on the other side. He worked steadily, stopping only to return to the barn to verify that the sleeper there did not wake. On each visit, he stood by Burley only long enough to touch him and to say, "You're all right. You don't have to worry about a thing." Each time he saw that Burley's breath came more shallow and more slow. And finally, on one of these trips to the barn, he knew as he entered the doorway that the breath had stopped, and he stopped, and then went soundlessly in where the body lay. It looked unaccountably small. Now, of its long life in this place, there remained only this small artifact of flesh and bone. In the hospital, Burley's body had seemed to Danny to be all off in another world. He had not been able to rid himself of the feeling that he was looking at it through a lens or a window. Here, the old body seemed to belong to this world absolutely. It was so accepting now of all that had come to it, even its death. Burley had died as he had slept. He had not moved. Danny leaned and picked up the still hands and laid them together. He went back to his digging and worked on as before. As he accepted again the burden of the work and measured his thoughts to it, Burley returned to his mind, and he knew him again as he had been when his life was full. He saw again the stance and demeanor of the man, the amused eyes, the lips pressed together while speech waited upon thought, an almost inviolable patience in the set of the shoulders. It was as though Burley stood in full view nearby, at ease and well at home, as though Danny could see him, but only on the condition that he not look. Danny dug the grave down until he stood hip-deep in it, and then he dug again until it was past waist-deep. And then, putting his hands on the ground beside it, he leapt out of it and stood looking down into it and thought. The grave was somewhat longer than Burley had been tall. It was widened at the middle to permit Danny to stand in it, to lay the body down. It was deep enough. Using the larger flagstones that he had taken from the grave, and bringing more from the creek, Danny shaped a long, narrow box in the bottom of the grave. Digging to varying depths to seat the stones upright, with their straightest edges aligned at the top, he worked his way from the head of the grave to the foot, and back again, tamping each stone tightly into place. The light beams that came through the heavy foliage shifted slowly from one opening to another, and slowly they became more perpendicular. The day grew warmer, and Danny paused now and again to wipe the sweat from his face. Again he went to the spring and drank, and returned to his work. The crickets sang steadily, and the creek made its constant little song over the rocks. Within those sounds and the larger quiet that included them, now and then a woodpecker drummed or called, or a jay screamed, or a squirrel barked. In the stillness, a few leaves let go and floated down, and always Danny could smell the fresh, moist earth of the grave. When he had finished placing the upright stones, he paved the floor of the grave, laying the broad slabs level and filling the openings that remained with smaller stones. He made good work of it, though it would be seen in all the time of the world only by him, and only for a little while. He put the shape of the stone casket together as if the stones had made a casket once before and had been scattered, and now he had found them and placed them together again. He carried up more stones from the creek, the biggest he could handle. These would be the capstones, and he laid them in stacks at the head and foot of the grave. It was ready now. He went down to the barn and removed the blankets that covered Burley and withdrew the pillow from under his head. He folded the blankets into a pallet on the paved floor of the grave and placed the pillow at its head. When he carried Burley to the grave, he went up by the gentlest, most open way, so that there need be no haste or struggle or roughness, for now they had come to the last of the last things. A heavy pressure of finality swelled in his heart and throat, as if he might have wept aloud, but as he walked he made no sound. He stepped into the grave and laid the body down. He composed it like a sleeper, laying the hands together as before, and the body seemed to accept again its stillness and its deep sleep, submissive to the motion of the world until the world's end. Danny brought up the rest of the bedclothes and laid them over Burley, covering at last his face. As before, the thought returned to him that he was not acting only for himself. He thought of Lida and Hannah and Nathan and the others, and he went down along the creek and then up across the thickety north slope on the other side, gathering flowers as he went. He picked up spires of goldenrod, sprays of farewell summer, and of lavender gold-centered asters. He picked yellow late sunflowers, the white starred flower heads of snakeroot, and finally near the creek, the triple-lobed, deep blue flowers of great lobelia. Stepping into the grave again, he covered the shrouded body with these, their bright colors and their weedy scent warm from the sun, laying them down in shingle fashion so that the blossoms were always uppermost, until the grave seemed at last to contain a small garden in bloom. And then, having touched Burley for the last time, he laid across the upright sides of the coffin the broad covering stones, first one layer, and then another over the cracks in the first. He lifted himself out of the grave and stood at the foot of it. He let the quiet reassemble itself around him, the quiet of the place now one with that of the old body sleeping in its grave. Into that great quiet he said aloud, "Be with him as he has been with us." And then he began to fill the grave.
Thank you for joining us for our 6th annual Kentucky Arts and Letters Day. I hope this experience has been enjoyable for you as it has been for me. From all of us at the Berry Center, we wish you a happy and wholesome holiday season. Until next time, this is Paul Borntraeger saying, I wish you well.